local fisherman named Joe. He took a picture of the pool and the waves and the wind, and he texted it to his mom. And the timestamp is 6:34.
A fisherman on Elbow Cay was texting his mother a photo of the sunset. That is the whole story of how he ended up at the center of the most watched missing person case in America right now. He wasn't investigating anyone. He wasn't following a tip. He pointed his phone at the water because the light looked good and his mother would have liked it. Somewhere in the background of that photo, without either of them knowing it, stood a couple finishing their drinks on a pool deck. He didn't find out who they were until the next morning, when the woman's face appeared on the news. And when a veteran crime reporter looked at the timestamp on that photo, the number she found did not match the story Brian Hooker had been telling the world for 2 weeks. It was off by nearly an hour. And in this case, that hour changes everything. Before we go any further, drop where you are watching this from right now. City, state, country. This case has reached people in every corner of the United States and beyond, and I want to see just how far the story has traveled. Tell me in the comments. Her name was Lynette Hooker. She was 55 years old, from Onstead, Michigan, and by every public account, she was the kind of person who showed up fully in her own life. She and her husband Brian had been married for 25 years. And when the kids were grown and the calendar finally cleared, they did not choose the easy version of retirement. They bought a 40-foot sailboat, named her Soulmate, and started over on the water. They filmed all of it, for a YouTube channel called The Sailing Hookers. A couple documenting a life they had chosen, on purpose, together, for anyone who wanted to watch. That detail is worth sitting with. Because what happened next was not private. It happened to a couple who had invited the public in. And now the public is still watching, but the story is no longer the one they planned to tell. On the evening of Saturday, April 4, 2026, Brian Hooker reported to Bahamian authorities that his wife had fallen from their dinghy in rough water between Elbow Cay and Marsh Harbor, in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas. His account, as reported across multiple outlets, went like this. The couple had spent part of the afternoon and evening on Elbow Cay. When they were ready to return to Soulmate, their sailboat anchored nearby, they climbed into a small dinghy for the ride back. The water, Brian told authorities, was rough. A sudden gust came. Lynette went over the side. As she fell, the engine's safety cord pulled free from its socket, cutting power to the motor immediately. Brian said he paddled against the wind, trying to reach her. He said the current and the waves worked against him. He said he lost sight of her. He said the little boat drifted across the water for hours. And he said he finally came ashore near a Marsh Harbor boatyard at around 4 in the morning, walked through brush in the dark, and called police from there. That was the account. And for the first 2 weeks of April, it was what the official record looked like. On Wednesday, April 8, the Royal Bahamas Police Force detained Brian Hooker for questioning. Under Bahamian law, authorities may hold a person for investigation for a maximum of 5 days without charges. Brian was held for the full 5 days. On Tuesday, April 14, he was released. His attorney, Terrell Butler, stated publicly that prosecutors did not have sufficient evidence to hold him further. Brian appeared on NBC the following morning and said he still believed his wife was alive and that he would not stop looking for her. The next day, Wednesday, April 15, he left the Bahamas. He cited a family emergency connected to his terminally ill mother. Soulmate, the 40-foot sailboat that had been their shared home, was left behind at anchor near Marsh Harbor. A New York Post photograph taken after his departure shows it still sitting there, the pirate-themed flag they flew still moving in the wind. The cabin still arranged the way two people live when they are not planning to leave. As of April 20, 2026, 2 investigations are active. The Royal Bahamas Police Force is running its own inquiry. The United States Coast Guard has opened a parallel criminal investigation. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force has conducted shoreline sweeps, sea patrols, aerial drone surveillance, and submersible drone operations. Cadaver dogs have been deployed. A flotation device, believed to be one thrown toward Lynette that night, has been recovered. Authorities have not publicly stated where or when it was found. Lynette Hooker has not been found. That was the shape of this case going into the 3rd week of April. 2 investigations, no arrest, no body, no charges, and a husband who had left the country. And then, from the background of a photo a fisherman sent to his mother, the timeline began to come apart. Ashley Banfield has been covering crime for 36 years. She built most of that career inside the largest broadcast networks in America. These days she runs her own independent podcast, Drop Dead series, which means she answers to no network executive, no advertiser, and no editorial calendar that requires her to wait for a press release before she moves. In the middle of April, she told her audience she was going to the Abaco Islands. Not to report on the case from a hotel desk. Not to summarize what police had already said. She was going to stand in every place Brian Hooker described standing. She was going to feel the wind at 6:30 in the evening on the western side of Elbow Cay. She was going to speak to the people who had served the hookers that night, the bartender, the dock workers, the boat captains who knew that stretch of water the way most people know their own neighborhood. This matters because Banfield did not arrive on Elbow Cay looking for evidence of a specific conclusion. She arrived with a reporter's question. A simple one. Could Brian Hooker's account of April 4th survive contact with the people who were actually there? Everything that follows in this video is downstream of the answer that question produced. The last place Lynette Hooker is confirmed to have been seen by anyone other than her husband is the Abaco Inn, a small resort on the northern stretch of Elbow Cay with 14 rooms, a pool, a manicured lawn that drops to a low seawall, and a bar that faces west over the water. Banfield spoke on the record with the bartender who served the hookers that evening. His first name is Ken. He told her, clearly and without much hedging, that the last round he poured for the couple went out somewhere between 6 o'clock and 6:30 that evening. 6 to 6:30. Hold that number. From the bar, the hookers moved to the pool deck. The pool at the Abaco Inn sits between the main building and the seawall, looking out toward the open water. At that latitude, in early April, the sun does not set until approximately 7:30 in the evening. Full dark does not arrive until around 8. Which means that at 6:30, the pool deck at the Abaco Inn is lit by late afternoon sun, warm, clear, and fully visible to anyone on the water. Banfield made a point of standing on that exact pool deck at 6:35 in the evening, on a day close enough to April 4th to make the comparison useful. She described what she saw on her podcast in plain language. The sun was still up. It was in her eyes. The light on the water was warm and direct. She said without hesitation that at that hour, a person in the water near that pool deck was visible, not partially visible, not visible in ideal conditions, visible. That is the physical setting. Now here is the piece that moved millions of people. On the evening of April 4th, a man named Joe was on Elbow Cay. He was a local fisherman. He had no connection to the hookers, no awareness of who they were, and no reason to be paying attention to the couple on the Abaco and pool deck. He was doing something ordinary. He pointed his phone at the water because the light on the horizon looked good and he wanted to send the image to his mother. He sent it. The file left his phone with a timestamp written by his device's internal clock. That timestamp read 6:34 p.m. In the background of the image, not centered, not posed, not the subject of the photograph in any intentional way, two people are visible on the pool deck. Joe did not know who they were until the following morning, when Lynette Hooker's face appeared on the news. Banfield confirmed the photograph's existence on her podcast and confirmed the 6:34 timestamp. She described how she obtained it from Joe directly. She named him by first name. She described the image. Now, one thing worth saying clearly, because clarity here protects your trust in everything else this video tells you. Banfield's report is investigative journalism. It is not a laboratory result. The photograph's metadata, the embedded data that would confirm whether the timestamp was altered, whether the GPS coordinates match the Abaco in, whether the file has been edited in any way, has not been publicly released in authenticated form as of the date of this video. That kind of forensic work happens inside the Coast Guard's criminal file or the Royal Bahamas investigation, on a timeline that runs well outside of what media reporting can see. What journalism does, what Banfield did, is move a piece of evidence from a place no one was looking into a place where formal investigators are now required to address it. That is the function it serves. And it is a significant one. Here is what the photograph, taken at face value, means for Brian Hooker's account of that evening. Brian has consistently described the couple departing Elbow Cay around 7:30 in the evening. That has been the anchor of his timeline since he first spoke to police. Joe's phone says the couple was still on the pool deck at 6:34. Brian's account places the departure nearly an hour later than the image suggests it could have occurred. One of those is wrong. And the next chapter is about what happens when you run the numbers. Set the emotion aside for a moment. What follows is not interpretation. It is arithmetic. And arithmetic does not care about anyone's feelings or anyone's account. Brian Hooker told authorities he and Lynette left the Elbow Cay area at approximately 7:30 in the evening on April 4th. He said he arrived at a Marsh Harbor boatyard at around 4 in the morning on April 5th. That is a crossing time of approximately 8.5 hours. The distance between Elbow Cay and Marsh Harbor, across the Sea of Abaco, is roughly 4 miles. 4 miles. Banfield spoke on the record with a boat captain familiar with that stretch of water, identified in her reporting as Captain Duncan. He told her that in the conditions Brian described that evening, a dinghy crossing those 4 miles would take somewhere between 1 and 3 hours. At the outside. Even accounting for wind, current, and paddling rather than motoring. Run the math on Brian's original timeline, 8.5 hours to cover 4 miles of sheltered island water, at a maximum crossing time of 3 hours. That leaves 5.5 hours inside Brian's own account with no explanation attached to them. 5.5 hours. In a small boat. On 4 miles of water. Now apply the photograph. If the couple was still on the pool deck at 6:34, as Joe's phone recorded, then the earliest the dinghy could have left the Elbow Cay area was sometime after that, call it 6:38, giving them a few minutes to walk to the dock and get underway. That is not 7:30. That is nearly an hour earlier. Which means the crossing did not take 8.5 hours. It took closer to 9.5, possibly 10. The gap between what the physics of that water allow and what Brian's account requires has just grown from 5.5 hours to 6.5 hours, minimum. Even if you grant the most generous possible reading, wind drift, disorientation, exhaustion, the dinghy moving sideways rather than forward, 4.5 hours remain inside Brian Hooker's account without an explanation. The dinghy was somewhere during those hours. It did something. 4 miles of sheltered water does not absorb 4.5 missing hours without a new answer. Now add the light. If the departure was closer to 6:38 than 7:30, then whatever happened on that water happened while the sun was still up. Not at the edge of dusk. Not in the fading gray of a late evening. In daylight. Elbow Cay is one of the most trafficked stretches of water in the northern Bahamas. It is surrounded by resort properties, marinas, and working fishing boats. A person in the water at 6:30 or 6:45, on a calm enough evening that local captains were still running, on water where the shoreline is visible in every direction, that is not a person who disappears in 3 seconds into the open ocean. Brian has said in his account, as recorded by the Royal Bahamas Police Force, that strong currents carried Lynette away and that he lost sight of her. That statement was already difficult to square with the geography before the photograph. After the photograph repositions the departure into full daylight on traffic water, it becomes considerably harder to hold up. There is one more number worth placing here, because it has not received the attention it deserves. If Brian arrived at the Marsh Harbor boatyard at 4 in the morning, and if the departure was as early as 6:38, the total time on the water was roughly 9 hours and 20 minutes. Captain Duncan said the crossing should take 3 hours at the outside. That means, even using the most forgiving possible estimate, there are 6 hours and 20 minutes inside Brian Hooker's account that the geography, the physics, and the conditions of that night cannot explain. 6 hours and 20 minutes. That is not an accusation. It is a question the arithmetic raises entirely on its own. Where did an 8-foot dinghy go on 4 miles of sheltered water for 6 hours? The water is real. The numbers are real. And right now, the answer is not. Here is what I want to know from you. Investigators on both sides of this case have access to everything we just walked through, and more. So what do you think they are missing? What is the detail that has not been talked about enough? What angle has not been covered? Drop it below. This community has caught things the headlines skipped before. Let's see what you see. While the arithmetic was building, the water was giving things back. Multiple outlets, including CNN, have confirmed that a flotation device, believed to be one thrown toward Lynette on the evening of April 4, was recovered during the search operation. Carlia Worth, Lynette's daughter, confirmed this publicly in an emotional on-camera statement. She said she received a call from Search and Rescue informing her that a device had been found, the same device that had been thrown toward her mother when she went over the side. Authorities have not publicly released where the device was found or when. But what a recovered flotation device does, in a search operation of this kind, is narrow the area. It gives the teams working the water a reference point. It tells them something about where the current was moving that night, and where the search should concentrate. The ocean did not give up an answer. But it gave up a coordinate. Meanwhile, in Marsh Harbor, soulmates sat at anchor. The 40-foot sailboat the couple shared home, the subject of their YouTube channel, the vessel they had bought in Texas, fixed up together, and sailed down through the Gulf, was still sitting on its mooring when Brian boarded a flight back to Michigan on April 15. The New York Post photographed it. The pirate-themed flag the hookers flew was still there, moving in the wind. The cabin, from what could be seen, was still arranged for the life two people live when they intend to come back. Soulmate is still there as of this recording. The YouTube channel, The Sailing Hookers, is still up. The couple filmed their life for strangers. Sunsets, anchorages, mechanical repairs, quiet mornings on the water, the kind of content that makes retirement look like it was always supposed to feel that way. The channel is now a public record of a life that has been interrupted, and the strangers who were watching it for pleasure are now watching it for something else entirely. Brian flew home. The boat did not. On Tuesday morning, April 14, the day he was released from police custody, Brian appeared on NBC. He said on camera that his only focus was finding his wife, and that he would not stop looking. 24 hours later, he was on a plane. His attorney has said the departure was connected to a family emergency. Brian's mother, who is terminally ill. Carly Aworth acknowledged in a statement to Fox News Digital that Brian's mother had indeed been seriously ill for some time. What Carly said she could not reconcile was not the illness itself. It was the sequence. A husband who said publicly that finding his wife was his only focus and then left the country the next morning. That observation belongs to Carly. It is not a legal finding. It is not a conclusion. It is what a daughter noticed about a sequence of events, and she said it out loud. There is one more detail from the early hours of this case that has received less attention than it deserves. Carly Aworth has described to CNN the phone call she received from Brian on Sunday evening, somewhere between 8 and 8:30, informing her that her mother was missing. By that point, Lynette had been missing for roughly 16 hours. Carly described the tone of that call as matter of fact. She recalled Brian telling her, in words to that effect, that her mother was missing, that they did not know where she was, and that they were going to come see her soon. She said the voice she heard on the other end of the line struck her as odd given what was being communicated. This is stated precisely as Carly's account of her own experience. It is not evidence of any crime. It is not a conclusion. It is the shape of how news arrived at a family 16 hours late, in a tone that surprised the person receiving it and what that person made of it. Carly has been public and precise about what she is asking for. She has not called for a conviction. She has raised, on the record, 2 prior incidents she says her mother described to her, a choking incident and a threat made in 2024 to throw Lynette off the boat. These are Carly's stated claims, attributed to her directly. They have not been independently confirmed by any investigative body in public record. She has asked the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the United States Coast Guard, and any relevant American jurisdiction to treat this case with the full weight of a serious investigation. Not a verdict. An investigation. She has been careful to say exactly that, and that distinction tells you something about the position she is in right now. Here is what the public record contains as of April 20, 2026. A fisherman named Joe took a photograph on Elbow Cay on the evening of April 4 and texted it to his mother. The timestamp embedded by his phone reads 6:34 in the evening. 2 people are visible in the background on the Abaco and pool deck. Joe identified those two people the following morning as the hookers after Lynette's face appeared in news coverage of her disappearance. A bartender named Ken told a reporter on the record that the last drinks he served the hookers that evening went out somewhere between 6 o'clock and 6:30. Ashley Banfield stood on the Abaco and pool deck at 6:35 on a comparable evening and confirmed that the sun was still fully up, that the light was on the water, and that a person in the water at that hour would have been clearly visible from the shore. A boat captain named Captain Duncan told Banfield on the record that the crossing between Elbow Cay and Marsh Harbor, approximately 4 miles of sheltered island water, should take between 1 and 3 hours in the conditions Brian described. Brian Hooker told authorities the couple left the Elbow Cay area at approximately 7:30 and arrived at a Marsh Harbor boatyard at 4 in the morning. That is 8.5 hours. If the photograph moves the departure to around 6:38, that becomes nearly 10 hours. A flotation device believed to have been thrown toward Lynette that night has been recovered. The search area has been narrowed. Brian Hooker was held by Bahamian authorities for 5 days and released without charges on April 14. He left the Bahamas the following day. The sailboat he and Lynette shared as their home remains at anchor in Marsh Harbor. The United States Coast Guard has an open criminal investigation. The Royal Bahamas Police Force investigation is ongoing. Neither has publicly announced charges, arrests, or findings. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Now here is the category of evidence that experienced investigators in missing persons cases value most highly. They call it bystander timestamp evidence. A photograph taken by a stranger with no stake in the outcome. A file stamped by an internal clock that no one thought to tamper with because no one knew there was anything to tamper with. Joe was not building a case. He was not paying attention to the hookers. He was texting his mother. The couple in the background of his photo arrived there by accident. And the clock inside his phone had no reason to lie. That is what makes this category of evidence so difficult to dismiss. There is no motive attached to it. There is no frame-up possible, because Joe did not know who Brian Hooker was until the morning after. A forensic metadata examiner can confirm whether the timestamp was altered, whether the GPS coordinates match the Abaco in, and whether the image file has been modified in any way. That work happens inside a formal investigation on a schedule that media cannot see. What journalism did, what Banfield did, was take a piece of evidence from a place no one was looking and move it into the part of the case where authorities are now required to account for it. That is not a small thing. Brian has not been charged. His attorney has spoken publicly on his behalf. Both investigations remain active on both sides of the Gulf Stream. None of that changes the arithmetic. And the arithmetic was not built by anyone with an agenda. It was built from Brian Hooker's own stated timeline, a boat captain's professional estimate of crossing conditions, and a stranger's phone clock. The gap between what the numbers allow and what the account requires is not an accusation. It is a question. A simple one. Where did an 8-foot dinghy go on 4 miles of sheltered water for more than 6 hours? The geography does not have an answer. The physics do not have an answer. And as of this recording, Brian Hooker's account does not have an answer either. There is one voice in this case that deserves the last word in this video. It belongs to Lynette's daughter, Carly Aworth. She appeared on NBC in the days after Brian left the Bahamas. She said she never imagined her mother would disappear. She said her mother was a good person who did not deserve this. And then she said something that has stayed with every person who heard it. She said that part of her fears her stepfather is going to walk away a free man, and part of her hopes he does not. That is not a verdict. No court has issued one. No prosecutor has filed charges. What it is, precisely, is the weight a daughter is carrying while two countries run their investigations and the rest of us watch from a distance. Lynette Hooker deserves a full accounting. That is what her family has asked for. And that is what this case is still waiting to produce. The next video follows the money, the boat, the insurance, the accounts, and the paper trail that investigators on both sides of the Gulf Stream are now quietly pulling on. And what that trail is already starting to show is